Hey photographers, welcome to the Bokeh Podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Holritz, and really I'm just here to help you build a sustainable photography business. That certainly means helping you improve your photographic skills and enabling you to become a stronger business owner, but it also means helping you work more efficiently so you don't get burnt out in the long run. We are sponsored by photographersedit.com, custom photo editing for the professional photographer, and Miilu.com, that's MIILU.com, the simplest way to create and manage timelines and shot lists for the events you're photographing. All right, let's get into today's episode. All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we're back for another Bokeh Podcast episode and a brand new guest. Drae Brown is here with me. Drae, thanks so much for hanging out with us today and ultimately sharing your wisdom with us as well.
Hey, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to, getting, out to a different audience.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and just very briefly for everybody listening in, I had the opportunity to come across Drae's work in Tamaya Colvin's Facebook group, photography Facebook group, her education community. For those of you who don't know who Tamaya is, if you somehow missed that, she created the Cookout conference that I've mentioned countless times here on the show. We've sponsored the conference. And it's amazing. By the way, Drae, have you been at that conference? Did I somehow miss meeting you?
No, I think I've been a member not even a year, I believe. And I was looking forward to this one, but COVID.
I know. Yeah. Well, and it's actually going to be in Chattanooga, my hometown, and I'm pretty excited about it. Yeah. Unfortunately, it looks like the numbers have dwindled quite a bit. I think there's maybe about 50 people attending at this point. It's going to be in October, but nonetheless, I hope at some point we can meet in person. But I came across Drae's work in that Facebook group, and it was just absolutely stunning. And Drae, with your permission, I'd love to be able to post those images to the show notes for this particular podcast episode, because we're going to actually break those images down, how you approach the lighting.
Okay. Yeah. Yes, of course. By all means.
Okay, cool. And we'll work out those details later on. But before we get to talking about your lighting technique, and more specifically, the way that you mix natural light or sunlight and strobe light, there are some questions that I usually ask the guests that come on the show. And I want to get into those first. The first one, and one of our most probably popular, if you will, or certainly the one that I ask the most, has to do with brand position. And for anybody listening in who's not familiar with the concept, very simply, we're talking about the value proposition, hopefully the unique value proposition that one's business offers to the marketplace. So what is that for you, Drae?
For me, it is lighting first. People always ask, how did I light it? Next would be, where did you find that location? And then my angles. I try to take a unique approach. It's just kind of, I think, like every photographer, it's what you see.
Yeah.
And, that's typically kind of how I go into it. That's just my unique perspective on, what I think is dope.
Well, and you've got quite a fascinating perspective too. For everybody listening in, you're going to want to go check out Drae's Instagram feed, and we'll of course post this or link to it in the show notes at bokehpodcast.com. But it is D Brown 615 and then _ photography. And go check out Drae's work there, because you talk about your approach, your lighting technique, your angles, and there's such a wonderful variety there in your feed. I really love it.
Thank you so much. I think early on I knew that I didn't want to get put in a box.
Yeah.
And, so that was like really important. In the beginning, I didn't have the ability to necessarily, reach out to different people. And, sometimes people want to see, what you've done instead of like what you want to do. And that's, so that's where I struggled in the beginning. And then, once I put out some decent work at the time, then you were able to, like cross those lines. And, so now I'm able to show and work with like a lot of diverse people. So I think that's really cool.
Well, and the work is quite diverse too. And again, quite impressive. I'm looking at your Instagram profile, and it says your fashion, lifestyle, and portrait. That feed represents that quite accurately. And then right underneath that, it says creatively creating. What do you mean by that?
I think that I spend probably more time planning than, of course, than the actual shoot.
Interesting.
So, for me, especially when it comes to I guess, everybody's, wanting to collab and, do these TFP shoots. And for me, it's all about the concept. I don't shoot just to shoot. Like I think in the beginning you're so excited. You've got a camera and
Yeah.
so you end up shooting a lot of stuff. And a lot of it, to me, I think I learned really quickly. I would do a shoot and I was excited to do it. But then once I did it, I was like, it's okay, and so from there, I was like, okay, I'm wasting a lot of time, with shooting things that I don't necessarily like. And, just one day I was like, hey, it just has to make sense. And if I don't think it's awesome, then honestly, then it's not a trade. You know what I mean? Like it's you're winning because you're getting good photos, but for me, I'm not getting anything that I can use. So, I just spend a lot more time, now it's a couple weeks, sometimes it's a month of back and forth, hey, making sure the outfit is right. Yeah. And all these things are, coming into place before I am like, yes, so yeah, okay. I do. Planning is my thing.
Huh, that's really interesting. What would you say? I mean, when you talk about planning, you mentioned the outfits. I would assume the location. Yes. Are there other specific elements of that planning process?
Yes. So I'm in Nashville.
Okay.
And we're going through, I guess, the gentrification stage where now everybody's living in the city, like downtown. And so I would, drive and see these unique spaces. And at first I used to just find a space and then would shoot anything there. So then after you would do it, you're like, this doesn't really make sense for this space. Like sure. The concept, the outfit, it didn't make sense for the space. So what I had to learn, and what I did was I had to make sure, and now I always make sure that every single part of it makes sense. The outfit matches the location and vice versa. The model matches the concept. I think that's probably one of my unique gifts is I can look at a model's, page and pictures and figure out what would work for them as well. So I think that's just my approach.
Well, and speaking of, that's actually a really great segue to my next question, because here I normally ask about customer experience and what you do as a photographer to create a really great customer experience. But I want to put a little bit of a twist on that because even as I look at your Instagram feed here, there's actually a black and white photo of a model smiling, kind of shot from a profile angle that you posted back on August 17th. For anybody who's curious, you can go take a look at this photo. There is just this genuine emotion coming through her smile that I think is wonderful. Yes. Is there something in particular that you're doing, or I'm assuming a series of things probably, that you're doing to help create a really positive environment where the model feels comfortable enough to be able to express that kind of real emotion?
I'm an ultimate people person. And but I'm a big observer. So I tend to pay attention to everything. I tell ladies all the time, I was like, I can tell how you're feeling kind of based on how you're dressed. Sometimes, the way your hair is, of your polish, whatever it is, like I'll pay attention to these things and it kind of tells me, some things about you. And, just genuine conversation and like actually caring, I think is helpful. So, I guess to kind of answer it, I went through a phase of I was making money, but it was just paid work. Like there was no feeling behind the work.
Okay.
And for me, it was the worst time of my career. Like it was horrible because it was just, okay, money's good, but I didn't like what I was doing. So it was kind of hard to get that expression when I was feeling that way. And then I stepped back. We had, when COVID first hit, it gave me a much needed break. And now I shoot, 95% of what I shoot is something I want to shoot. So now it's really easy to, get those connections and just talking to people. And I mean, I think it was her birthday, and we, just through talking, and she's a business owner as well. So I, congratulating and all those things. And, you got those natural smiles.
Well, so there's a couple things you mentioned there. One, you talked about how when you genuinely enjoy what you do, naturally setting a great environment for the subject, it becomes much, much easier, right? So you're comfortable, you're excited. That energy then translates to your subject. I think that's really important. You also mentioned something else that I'm really curious about. This has been a topic that we've kind of touched on a little bit here and there on the podcast because I'm personally fascinated by it. But when we talk about this idea of caring for our clients, genuinely caring for our clients, it's in some ways it's kind of a cliche thing that we'll say on the fly as business owners. It's another thing to actually do it. And I'm curious how you do that intentionally. What does that look like?
I learned through trial and error what I didn't like.
Okay.
So, I mean, I've been full-time for 2 years tomorrow, I think.
Oh, that's awesome. Congrats.
Yeah. So I just thought about that. So I think tomorrow will be 2 years full-time. But before, as I was building, if I was available and you wanted to pay my fee, I would do it just about. And, but through that, I learned what type of shoots I didn't like. I'm not great with toddlers. So I had to learn that, like, oh, okay, no, I'm not comfortable in this type of setting. So I had to stop, I did stop. I stopped doing it.
Okay.
And I still get offers all the time and I'll turn them down or refer them to someone else. But, I think I don't want to have that experience where I leave the shoot feeling like I didn't give it my all. So, I just learned to turn away things that I'm not interested in. And, for me, that just made me so much more, thankful. And I go into it because I've typically, and I know, again, my way is different, but I talk to people from the time they book me, and sometimes even before then, but, from the time they book me until the day of the shoot, we're in communication. So I know I ask a lot of questions. I ask, what are you wearing? What's your vision? And hopefully we can meet in the middle. So that way, I think being prepared is takes a lot away from the jitters and, just not feeling comfortable. So the more prepared I am, I'm okay.
That's interesting. So, I mean, it seems like we're kind of coming back to that theme of, first of all, if you're good personally and certainly excited about the work that you're doing, that translates to the experience that you're able to provide for the client and helping them genuinely feel cared for. Because it's coming from a good place, if we're not, it's kind of wild when you think about it a little bit, like how much of our personal lives kind of comes out in the way that we work with others. If we're not in a good place personally, if we're not really stoked about what we're doing, that can interfere with creating a really great experience for that subject or the subjects at hand. And so I think that's a really great reminder, honestly, for all of us. What was it that you did to clearly establish? I mean, there's so many different options, right, in the photography world, so many different directions that we can go. You've landed on this direction that you're really stoked about. How did you do that? Because I think a lot of photographers get into photography and they're like, I don't know which direction to go. I like this thing, I like that thing. And then sometimes they'll just kind of do a little bit of everything, and that can muddle the brand. How did you land on what you like?
For me, even in the beginning when I did a lot of trade work and, a lot of the models were basically at the same point in their journey as I was. We were beginners. So, I was a beginner photographer. They were beginner models. And I always knew that I was into fashion, but trying to figure out how to translate that into, sustainability in a sense. So sometimes what I would do just on my own, if I met a model that, had the look that I was going for, but maybe not the clothing, I would thrift. I would, spend my own money to to create the look that I wanted to put out. And I think that was, something I was willing to do just because, like I said, I wasn't happy. Like, I'm like, okay, the model's good, but the look could be a lot better. So I just invested in myself and the model to create what I wanted the world to see.
So kind of back to that trial and error process where you try this, you try that, you figure out what you like, don't like, and that ultimately leads to a kind of a style and approach for your photography.
Style, yes. And I think it's important to have some inspiration. A photographer that you look up to, designers, whoever it is, who, I saw a picture and, I saw a picture on Instagram when I first started shooting, and it looked different. And I was like, what about it? It wasn't the edit. It wasn't, but what I come to figure out was it was the lighting. And I was like, okay. So I reached out to the photographer, and he was more than obliged, just answering any question that I had. And he used lighting. He used off-camera flash in his photos. So for me, I learned off-camera flash, honestly, before I learned natural light.
Interesting. And that was largely because that's what grabbed your attention. You're like, oh, that's really cool. I want to go check that out, learn that technique, and try to apply it to my work.
Correct.
That's really interesting. Okay. Well, I know that we could kind of follow that rabbit trail a long ways because, choosing a style, again, there's so many options. And of course, every personality is a little bit different. Our interests, our backgrounds, our preferences, the things that do grab our attention, those that don't. It can really be tough to make that choice sometimes. But I think what you're explaining is a really great place to start for any new photographers listening in, which is trial and error. Try this, try that. If you like this thing, great, run with a bit of that, but get rid of the stuff you don't like, and certainly explore those things that are particularly attention grabbing for you. In this case, for you, off-camera lighting, which is the very thing that we're going to talk about here in more detail in just a little bit. Before we do, though, a couple more questions. Free time. This is something that we talk about a lot on the podcast because I think, unfortunately, in the photography industry, a lot of photographers are missing out on what can be their privilege of having freedom and flexibility as business owners because they're stuck behind their computer working all the time. Is there something in particular that you have worked out for yourself that has helped you have more freedom, more flexibility as a business owner, where you're able to run your business, but you also have time for the important people in your life and doing things that you enjoy outside of work?
Yes. And I'll be honest, COVID helped me in that situation.
Really? Okay.
Yes. So before, for a very long time, and I know like a lot of photographers that aren't focused on, corporate type of work, then the rest of us are doing just as, pretty much primarily our weekends are, for shooting. And it would be, all day Saturday and Sunday as long as, as I allowed.
Yeah.
And, for I have a family, kids and a significant other that we're weekend people, and I just did not have the time. And you knew it was taking a toll. So for me, COVID helped because, people were having more time, people were available on Tuesday to do a shoot, or, when it just would have been Saturday before. So I've been able to spread myself, to spread the days out. And even if it's one shoot a day, that's better than, 7 shoots on Saturday, taking up the whole day.
Yeah.
So for me, it's been really helpful. And then from there, I've just gotten to a point that Sunday is off limits.
Okay.
I've had to get to that point. It's like, nope, no shooting on Sunday. It's a family day, even a me day, but you have to, at some point you have to get it, because if not, I've been burned out, so I know how that feels. And this was like the best thing. Like I said, God, it's bad that COVID happened, but it was great for me because it made me pivot in a sense. So I've really flourished really since all of this has happened because I've, balanced it out.
And I have a lot of respect for that too, because I mean, this has been a tough time. My company got hit super hard because our business, Photographers Edit, is about editing images for photographers. Photographers weren't shooting. And then and when they started shooting again, they probably didn't have the extra cash to spend on editing, or at least it felt that way. And so, the work that we were getting has been quite a bit limited. I've seen this affecting the photography industry as a whole, and man, it can be so easy to kind of get sucked down that hole of depression, if you will, seeing our businesses affected the way that they have been. And yet this mentality that you're talking about of, despite it being a tough situation, leveraging it as an opportunity to make change in your life, make change in your business for the better. Massive respect for that. I think that's really impressive. And I mean, ultimately, what do you think the biggest takeaway has been? What's the biggest change that you've made for yourself? Has it been this thing about how you manage time, or is there something else?
How I manage time, most definitely.
Okay.
Yes, because, you're home. And like I said, I mean, everybody's home.
Yeah.
Everybody's home. Our kids are, virtual learning. So like the house is full. We have a dog, everybody.
Yeah.
It's just people here. But yes, just managing that time has been super important, because honestly, that was probably my worst thing in ways. And I just felt like I had to figure out a way to pivot, because if I didn't, I would be like a lot of other photographers that I know that were just kind of, and maybe are still kind of stuck. I took the opportunity, I did a wedding right before the shutdown, and I took maybe 3 weeks off once it shut down, just to kind of breathe and think of what my next move would be, because I knew things were going to be different.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, because we were on a complete lockdown, phase 1. And I was like, what am I going to do? Once I started to get that itch again. And honestly, for me, I was thinking, well, okay, I'm at home. What can I do at home? And I did a complete 360. I started to try product photography. And I was like, oh, you can do this from home. I can work at my own pace.
Yeah.
And make some mistakes. If it works, don't post. If it works, post it. If it doesn't work, don't post it.
Yep.
And so that kind of gave me a refresher. I was like, oh, okay. And then I saw how difficult product photography is.
Sure.
And it's like, oh, I have a whole nother respect for product photographers, because a lot of times it takes so much equipment to do it. So, but for me, that was it. I just had to find a way to, I guess, not go under and keep myself relevant while not, sacrificing, my health, trying to just go out and shoot when I know I shouldn't be shooting.
Well, and you mentioned that photographers can get stuck. It can be easy for them to get stuck. And it reminds me of something that I ride motorcycles. It's one of the things that I like to do for fun. And one of the things that I've learned, particularly going to the racetrack and riding motorcycles on the track, is that you can't target fixate, right? It's easy for us in the moment, especially if you're riding a motorcycle, to maybe temporarily get scared in the split second and to fixate on this thing that you're worried about running into or running over, or hitting that curve in the wrong way, and we just uber focus on that thing. And the problem with that then is that we miss what's going on ahead, and as a result, it can actually cause us to crash. And so what you'll hear from instructors or experienced riders is don't target fixate. Not only that, make sure that you keep a broad field of vision. Because the reality is, if you look at the human body and the way that we see things, we have, I think, what amounts to about a 180-degree field of view. And it's very easy in a moment where we're freaking out to get fixated and have a super narrow field of view, and we miss what's going on around us. And as you pointed out, the opportunities that are around us. So what's good for us, not just in motorcycle riding, but also as photography business owners, is to avoid fixation on the thing in the moment that's kind of freaking us out, to continue to look ahead and make sure that we keep that broad vision, because it's going to enable us, as you pointed out, to be able to pivot. And that's so important as business owners. If we get stuck, if we get rigid, that puts us in a really bad spot to be able to grow a scalable business over the long run.
Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter. I feel like, some photographers, I think took for granted, or not necessarily knowing what effect COVID was going to have.
Sure.
And I was like, when it shut down completely, I was like, okay. And for me, April, I missed out, on a lot of money. I had, I think, 4 weddings, maybe 10 or 11 senior shoots.
Wow.
That all, that are like, hey, we're going to have to, reschedule. Like weddings were like, okay, we're going to, pretty much now, hey, it's going to be at least 2021 before we do some of these things.
Yeah.
And this is money that most of us are counting on.
Right.
So, I didn't have time to, like you said, worry about, to get fixated on the bad. It's like, okay, what can I do? What other services can I offer to get some type of cash flow, and still be, I guess, as close to worthwhile as possible. So, it was just, I think, I have business degrees. So that's how I was thinking first, instead of necessarily like, yeah, I want to shoot, but like I have a business to run and a family to support, and you had to just think of ways that you were able to kind of come out of it, and yes, so that's definitely important.
Well, again, it's a great reminder for all of us, and I appreciate you sharing that we need to stay flexible, be open to the possibility of pivoting, adjusting, and that will enable us to build a business for the long run. Along the lines of time management, we talk quite a bit about the idea of delegation or outsourcing on the podcast as well. And not just because I own an editing company, but when we talk about delegation, it's applicable to editing or album design, accounting work, administrative tasks, and the list goes on. You can have a second shooter helping manage gear. So many different ways that we can delegate some of our business to someone else or to a different entity for the sake of saving time. Is this something that you've experimented with? What's your experience been like with this idea of delegation?
Once you are at a point that you're able to do that, that is the best feeling in the world.
Yeah.
Because it is, I feel like a lot of, and for me, I think it was difficult because, and I think a lot of us, especially if you come into it alone and you learn a lot of these, if you're self-taught, then you're even more, I'll say you're even more protective of your craft.
Yeah.
So trying to find like-minded people that work on your, I guess, on kind of your same energy and your timing and all that is like, that's really hard. And I had trial and error with that as well. Like you're excited to collaborate and work with, other talented people just based off of what you may see on social media. But then once you work together, you may find that your styles are completely different and the way that you work doesn't mesh, So I think when you find those things, like you hold on for dear life because it's not easy, So I think that's one of those things like, I found a very small group of people that we work together on everything, and they're invaluable.
Yeah, but it is an investment. You're right. It's not an easy thing, and it does take time. Not only investing in the process of finding the right people who do vibe with whatever it is that you're wanting to get done as a photographer, as a business owner, but then there's an investment in time and learning how to communicate and being able to read each other a little bit more effectively, and as a result, then being able to produce a great final product or final experience for the client. And that's super important. And I think that in of itself is a really great reminder for all of our listeners when it comes to this idea of delegation. It is a process. You have to be okay with that. On the other side of that process, investing some time into those relationships is a pretty significant payoff in time and potentially growth in business as well. but is a process, and being okay with that and kind of just going with that flow is really important. So again, I appreciate your reminder, Drae, but let me ask you one more question before we get into strobe lighting and the way that you approach this particular shoot. An impactful business or self-help book that you've read or listened to that you would recommend to our listeners?
I am a firm believer in the, Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Yeah.
That's one of those. I need to do better at when, like I said, my major flaw is time management sometimes, and making time for, I guess, enhancements. So, things that are going to better, me as a person, a father, the photographer, that'll kind of come, I guess.
Sure.
But I think Rich Dad Poor Dad is just one of those, classics. But I do want to find more time to read, and I just have to make that time, because I don't, and I'm horrible at that.
No, I absolutely feel you though. I have bought endless books for my Kindle. And I'm like, man, that seems like such a great book. So I go ahead and get that. And then another one pops up at some point. Somebody recommends it, that's podcast or otherwise. I get that one. And I keep adding them, but then I'm not reading consistently enough to actually get through the library. And I just keep adding more to the library. So I absolutely feel your pain. But Rich Dad, Poor Dad is a classic. And for anybody that's not read that book, it's a really interesting kind of introduction to a different mentality about wealth development. I read it years ago as well. In fact, this is really weird memory. Like, how sometimes you have these weird, very, very specific memories. I can't remember something that happened yesterday, but this happened years ago. I think I either finished reading that book or I was reading that book when I was sitting in a courtroom. I don't remember if I was having to go to court or I was there for someone else or what was going on. But for some reason, I was reading that book in a courtroom and I'd taken it with me. Nonetheless, highly recommend the book for anybody listening and who's not read that book before. We'll link to it in the show notes at bokehpodcast.com. And a little side note here for everybody listening too, Haley, who produces our show, has put together a really cool resource. If you go to Bokeh, Bokeh, bookshelf.com, the most popular books that have been mentioned here on the podcast, and 450 episodes or so now, you can see those books at bokehbookshelf.com. So go check those out. They're categorized and organized, linked to them on Amazon where you can go get a copy. And Rich Dad, Poor Dad is certainly a good one. We'll put that in the show notes as well. Let's jump to the main topic though, Drae. And again, just to reiterate, I was super impressed by your management of light for this particular shoot that we're going to be talking about. And with Drae's permission that he gave us earlier, we're gonna get these images. We'll put them in the show notes at bokehpodcast.com underneath this episode. For anybody listening in, make sure that at some point, if you're driving right now, don't do it right now, but make sure that you go take a look at these images so you have context to the conversation at hand, because we're going to be specifically talking about how Drae managed the shoot, the lighting for this shoot. It's just so beautifully done. The balance is incredible. But to start off, Drae, before we get into the technical side of things, talk to me about your intention in developing your off-camera lighting skills. I know that you said you were initially inspired by this one particular photographer. How long ago was that? And just to kind of briefly describe this process of developing your lighting skills over time.
So I probably had a camera 2 or 3 months at the time.
Okay.
And it wasn't even, not with the intention on becoming a photographer. It was just, I was working in corporate America. It was wanting to just have a hobby. And I bought a camera, Instagram and Facebook. And I like I said, I would just kind of look at locals and, kind of see what was going on. And I saw a picture and I was like, all right. And I reached out. And the next morning he said, "Are you free for coffee?"
Whoa, cool.
So I was like, I will be there with, bells on. And he, like I said, he broke it down to me in a way that I'm one of those, I like to, and I'm with every aspect, I have to see things. You can tell me, I can understand, but for me to see it is everything.
Yep.
So, he invited me. I was basically his assistant from that day forward. And I went with him on shoots probably 4 or 5 days a week. And I just watched and paid attention, as I'm moving lights and kind of watching how he interacted with the client. So for me, it was, I think what I learned most from him was to see the shot that you're trying to take instead of just taking pictures and hoping for the best, and, you know, like have an intent with every shot that you take. And that was, I think that's what I still use that mindset to this day.
That's interesting. So that idea of kind of pre-visualization, where you're thinking about it, you've got this image, this virtual image in your mind of what that final product should be, starting there and then trying to figure out how to make that happen.
How to make it happen. Yes.
That's cool. Okay. Well, I mean, if this shoot, that these images that I got to see were pre-visualized, it's kind of interesting to think about your approach to that you actually had an idea ahead of time. This is what you were going for. You know, intentionality is I've realized as I continue to get older, I'm 41 now, the significance of it. There's a certain part of me that is structured and organized, and there's another part of me that just kind of lets things happen. And I've realized more and more that the more I just kind of, quote, let things happen, especially when it involves other people and companies and businesses, I tend to miss out on opportunities. Being intentional, even when it comes to a shoot, has a pretty significant payoff. What does that pre-visualization process look like for you? I mean, do you have a kind of a routine that you come up with? What does it look like?
Yes. I mean, it's for me, I mean, sometimes it's creating a mood board, you know, sometimes even in Pinterest, I use Pinterest. So I may, you know, kind of get the concept together, create a mood board. Also, just so, and I'm in constant communication with the model or the client. So I'm bouncing ideas. They're kind of telling me what they think and their outfits and all these other things.
Okay.
And then from there, once we have that down, I'm looking for locations. And I think, like you said, like I'm getting old too. I'll be 40 in February. So
hey, that's not old. We're just getting older.
I'm right with you. So an important thing that I think I've learned is I used to try to just whatever time of day, like, okay, yes, we can do it at noon. And you learn that there is really, you know, times of the day to achieve, you know, certain light. And I've had to learn that through trial and error. So that one was she literally told me that she said, I can do a sunrise shoot. I was like, yeah, right. Because I'm really hard on models. So I just have to know how serious you are, because, you know, this was a 5:45 in the morning shoot.
Oof. Yeah.
Yes. So, you know, I threw out like that morning, I threw out like a feeler text at, you know, 5 a.m. like, hey, good morning. And I was like, okay, maybe she'll respond, maybe she won't. And she responded.
Yeah. If she doesn't respond, I'm going back to bed.
Well, I'm going back to bed. And she responded. And I was like, oh, okay. And I mean, she was there.
Yeah.
And we got lucky. The light was absolutely, the sunrise was beautiful. And, you know, it just worked out. And I mean, those pictures took 30 minutes.
Wow. And that, I think, I mean, first of all, there is a certain limitation on your time if you're talking about trying to utilize a sunset. So you know that going into it. But to your earlier point, planning, being intentional about what it is you're trying to accomplish enables you to be able to move efficiently through that shoot, get the shots, and be done. And it's a really, really great reminder for all of us as photographers, whatever type of work that we're doing. But let's get into the technical side of this shoot. First of all, talk to me about your go-to strobe. What is that strobe, and why is this your choice?
So my go-to is the Godox or Flashpoint, whichever you use. The Explorer 600.
Okay.
It is my absolute go-to because it's powerful, you know, enough to overpower the sun, as we say, and the battery lasts. So it's, you know, it's cordless. So it just has a battery connected to it that lasts all day long. So, you know, that I can take that one light and do almost everything I need to do, especially on location. I can do pretty much anything that I need with one light. So that is my absolute go-to strobe. And
when you talk about the battery, I'm assuming you have to charge that battery. How long does it take to charge it up?
It probably takes an hour and a half, 2 hours.
Oh, that's not bad.
Yeah, not bad at all.
And the Godox line is relatively affordable too, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, and that I started with alien bees,
Okay.
and like they have cords, and you need some type of power source to, if you're using them on location, you need a power source to, to plug them into. And it was excruciating carrying all this stuff, and this is, like I said early on, with no assistant, no help, just me. So I mean, it was terrible trying to lug all this stuff, to shoots in the summer outside back to back. It was just horrible. And then like the Godox line came, and it was affordable.
Yeah.
And like I said, the entire line is really, really great. And I've been with them now probably 2.5, 3 years.
And do you tend to use just that single light, or do you bring multiple lights on location? What does that process look like?
What I try to do now, if I know I have some help, then yes, I'm bringing everything. But if it's just me, a lot of the times it is literally just one light, and, where possible, using, the sun as a second light.
Right. And then just adjusting the power of the light, depending on whether you want the sun to be the main or the secondary light, correct?
That's it. You make your adjustments. But again, to me, it is all about, what shot you're trying to create. We get stuck in these rules, and I'm a firm believer of, there's certain photography rules that are meant to be broken, and it's your style. Now you may be able to do it an easier way, but it's not necessarily right or wrong. And of course, at the end of the day, it's completely subjective. Some people are going to like it and love it, and then some people, it's not for them.
Sure.
So you just have to, get to a point that you're comfortable with the outcome.
So you've mentioned the significance, or really discussed at length now, the significance of planning and being intentional going into a shoot. What did that planning process look like for this particular session? You knew you wanted to do a sunrise shoot, but outside of that, what kind of details were you looking for? What was the vibe that you were going for? Can you explain the planning process for this particular shoot?
Yes. What we were going for, like I said, yes, of course it was, the sunrise shoot, but it was also the colors. So, I mean, yeah, we wanted, those oranges. And what I was noticing, because every day I'm up, my dog is up at 6 a.m., 5:36.
Okay.
And so every morning when I would take him out, I would see, the skyline and the horizon. So I would see purples and oranges, and I'm like, man, this would be a great time to shoot, but I don't think I can trust anyone enough to make it for this time. And every day I see this, but I just would never reach out. And then she said, hey, like, I'm available for sunrise, like, I'm always up. I was like, okay, I'm gonna try it, we'll see. But I made it a really simple concept, just so if she didn't show, we don't have this huge team of people, So I was like, this is kind of like a test,
Yeah.
like I'd pretty much be up anyway, or close to being up. But so I'd be okay if she doesn't show, but like to have a team of people would kind of be a little disheartening. So I was like, let's do something really simple, and kind of that beach vibe. And anyone who's from Nashville, it's at Percy Priest, and by no means is Percy Priest a nice looking lake. Like, by no means, like, no, in no way is it nice. But if you learn to, like, I just found a nice spot, and with the sunrise, I mean, you would think you were on, like some nice resort or a beach or something, but you were literally just at this lake that looks terrible.
And yet, the way that you made these images look, I mean, that's the last thing that I would have thought when I'm looking at those. They're just stunning. And again, for everybody listening in, if you haven't looked at them yet, go to the show notes. We'll have these images in the show notes so you can kind of follow along, because I want to get into a bit more of the technical here. The placement of the lighting for these images, and the way that I actually grabbed a screenshot from that post that you did in the community. For those of you listening in, you'll be able to see each of these images individually. But there's the image that I'm looking at first is one of her kind of raising her arm up, and the water is kind of falling off of her arm. Then there's another one where she's looking kind of toward in the direction of the sun. There's another one where she's laying down, and then there's another one where she's looking directly at the camera. The sun's behind her. It's a really wonderful variety, by the way. I like that you incorporate variety. It's not just kind of a version of the same thing all the way through. But how did you determine, and let's actually walk through each of these, how did you determine the placement of the lighting for each of those? What was the thought process for each?
Well, typically, in that instant, you have the sun, or the sun's coming up. So you have the sun that's going to backlight her. And then I'm just thinking of what parts of her that I really want to showcase.
Okay.
So that's typically, where I go with each shot. I was like, where do I want this light to hit? And that's pretty much, that's usually just my way. That's literally what I'm looking at every time. It's like, okay, I want, a little shadow here. Let me feather a little bit.
Yeah.
Or again, let me light her whole body, but I use pretty big modifiers. So, it's typically going to be that entire body is going to be, lit up, because I'm thinking from a fashion perspective.
Okay.
So the clothing and those details are important to me. So I'm trying to get all of that into the frame. So I need something, a large modifier to I guess show all of that off. But yeah, that's pretty much what I do. I think of where I want the light to hit her, and so I move it, and models will tell you that I make it fairly easy because I do a lot of moving, and they get into a pose and I'm like, hold it, and then I will adjust instead of them necessarily having to do a lot of moving.
That's nice.
Yeah. So I do, I get my workout on, because I'm constantly, for one shot, or for one pose, I will probably get in 4 or 5 different positions and shoot just to see which one I like the most.
That's great. Well, and so take me to each of these images. We talk about the placement of the light. So the first one I'm looking at is again the one where she's got her arm raised up, and it's very. The placement of the light seems extremely intentional to play on this theme in our conversation, and I love that. In this case, it seems to be maybe at a 50 to 60 degree angle to the right. And it's a very subtle light. So is that about right as far as the placement of that light's concerned?
That's exactly right. That is exactly right. When I was learning, what I guess my homework was to try to figure out the light placement of, anybody's work. It was like, okay, yeah. So that was the work that was the homework that was given to me.
That's cool.
Like, hey, look at this picture. Tell me where the light is coming from.
Yep.
If you can possibly tell me, what type of modifier, but definitely the placement, of the light. So that was, like I said, I learned that really early, and I got good at it because that's just what I think of. I'm just always trying to think of, how to do it as efficiently as possible, like not necessarily wanting to have to bring out multiple lights if I don't have to, but I will. But usually it's one light and then the sun as another.
And then the image where she's on the right-hand side looking toward the middle of the frame where the sun is that just kind of a soft fill light there, a more even fill light?
Yes, and it was more of, because again, you're dealing with a decently, powerful strobe. So it may be, me dialing back the power. It may be, and I also, shoot in high speed sync a lot
Okay.
to kind of to get that mood. And then I add my light. So I kind of set the mood with the high speed sync, with my settings, with my shutter speed. And then, okay, let me just add that kick of light in here to really, balance it off.
When you say setting the mood with high speed sync, can you explain what you mean?
Yes. So it's, going past your camera's normal shutter speed, the 250 of a second, 320, I think. And, making it where it's going to become a lot, I'd say darker before you add your light.
Yeah.
So I may take mine down 2 or 3 stops, to where it's kind of dark and moody. And then I kick that light in there to usually illuminate the face or the whole body, whichever one I'm, going for at the time.
Yeah, and speaking of the whole body, the image where she's laying down, there's a lot more of her body in that image. Is that, again, kind of a subtle fill light from the top, or how did you have the light angled there?
Yes. In a perfect world, people may have a ladder or something else, but I think I probably had, for that shot, I probably had my 24-70. So, to get the whole body in frame. And I just literally stood over her and had the light, just like kick over her whole body. And, and that was, it was pretty simple as far as the lighting, just getting the shot to look how I wanted it to look, from a composition standpoint was a little, it's like, oh, I got to stand over you, to get this shot. But, but it came out really well. Oh,
for sure. I mean, it's just beautiful. And we're going to get into the subtlety and the technicality of how you're setting your light here in just a second, because it's one of the things that stands out to me about this shoot is you're not just like blaring the light at this person, just, launching all kinds of light. It's super, super subtle. And the way you balance it with the sunlight, I think, is really impressive. But just to finish off the final image here of these 4 that I'm seeing, where she's looking directly at the camera, the sun is in the middle of the image directly behind her. It looks like you used the light itself seems to be in a pretty central location, what would probably traditionally be called Rembrandt lighting, and that it's up just slightly high enough where she's getting a slight shadow underneath her nose. Is that roughly the setup there?
Correct. It is. I think for this one, and this is probably one of the last photos. I try to work smarter, and if you're going to have to get on the ground or get in the water, like, we're going to save these for the last one. So
sure.
I think this is probably one of the last ones that I took. But yes, I had the light, I'm thinking maybe over my left shoulder just a little bit, because again, it's just her and I, and we're in like this rocky, close to the water, but it's like a lot of like rocks and sand. And then, so it's like, you're trying to be careful, but the whole time I'm thinking, please don't let this light fall. That's all I was thinking. I was like, oh my gosh. But yeah, it was probably maybe over my left shoulder. But yeah, it was, I guess with me, it's become second nature. And anyone who's learning, again, I say be intentional and just kind of know what you want the shot to look like. And, if that means taking a few tests before and, making adjustments from there, to me, that's a good way to do it as well. Like, hey, this isn't, hitting how I want, or maybe my light is too harsh or whatever it is, you take those shots and then, check your work. Even once I've got my settings correct, every few shots I'm looking, just to make sure, like, because I'm trying to get as much right in camera as possible, so it's not as much work in post.
And that's a great segue to my last question as we finish up here. The settings for the light. I know this is a loaded conversation. We could probably spend a whole hour on at least, but just if you were to sum it up, and we have, and we were to assume that many of our listeners are relatively new the idea, the technical side of an off-camera light and setting that in conjunction with the camera maybe is a bit of a new concept. How would you explain the way that you're coming to these settings? Is it as simple as just setting in a setting, take a snapshot, a test shot, see what it looks like, and make another adjustment? Or are you also thinking from a technical standpoint about shutter speed, aperture, and f-stop for the light?
Yes. And like you said, it is loaded, but to make it as easy as possible, I didn't learn it in some technical mathematical way.
Okay.
It wasn't physics or geometry or it was, you kind of, you just go. But what I try to do is first, like, yes, it is important. If I'm going to teach you, then I'm going to teach you the right way. So yes, so it is important to know your shutter speed, your aperture, all those things, because the better you have those settings, the less power you'll have to use for your light. And that's one of those things, like, that I had to learn, like, oh, okay, I could use my light. If I set my settings right, the power on my strobe can be a lot lower than if I'm just trying to just messing around, just tinkering. I could use my strobe at 1/32 of the power, rather than it being at full power or a fourth, or So I'm rarely ever that low on my power if I've got my settings right. So yes, I do. I kind of, but you have to know what you're going for. Do you want to blur the background? Do you want everything to be in focus? Like, all those things are going to, make a big difference. And, I still make that mistake every so often, because we all like that, again, like the podcast, we love the bokeh. So I used to get stuck in that. And now I, had to learn to kind of get away from it a little bit.
But understanding how to adjust the settings. I mean, you talked about earlier using that high-speed sync in order to kind of minimize the ambient light. If you're going to do that, now you've got to open up the aperture a little bit, which naturally gives you that subtle bokeh in the background. And then you've got to match the light, the settings for the light, the power settings for the light based on the camera settings. It does sound like a lot of kind of trial and error leads you to a place where you're able to ultimately be able to make those adjustments on the fly pretty easily, right? Yes.
And I think another big thing is, having the right modifier, because, that to me, that plays a really big role. Because like you said, sometimes we just see something. In the beginning, I would see something and then I go buy a piece of equipment just because he has this, let me go get it. And you, without knowing really what each modifier is for, then you end up using, one modifier for every situation. And then you're wondering why the results are what they are.
Yeah.
And I had to learn that. So, but yes, like learning, to me, that is like really like a big thing to know, because I think even in my journey, I think at a point my lighting was really harsh and not balanced. And that was, I think, along my journey, that's what I've learned, how to make it like, yes, you may know it's with a strobe, but it's not so, harsh looking. Yes. That is like completely obvious.
It's funny that you're talking about the significance of being subtle in your lighting, because just in general, I think in our world right now in 2020, we need nuance. The last thing that we need is when we look at an image for that, unless of course that's the artist's intention. The last thing that we need is light just glaring in our faces. I mean, again, part of what captured my attention so much with these images was the subtlety of it, the nuance of it. It was that light is just kind of softly kissing the subject. It's just beautiful, the subtlety of it. And a really great example of, your technical ability. You mentioned the modifier, and in that post, you mentioned using the Easy Lock Octabox, a 48-inch. So you've got a pretty good size modifier that's really softening that light, which again encourages that
if you have, I think a lot of it could be achieved if you have an assistant, and like for this particular set, I feel like if I had an assistant and a reflector, like I feel like, an assistant with a reflector could give you, possibly giving me that same look.
Sure.
But I didn't have one, and, I did have my lights. So that was the way that I went. But yeah, I mean, it's really, I think like anything else, it's what you get out of it is what you put into it.
Sure.
I still today, I'm still not completely satisfied. There's still, further that I want to go. And it was always that way. Like I never, at my peak, it's still like, hey, I want to, go further. I want to learn a couple of different techniques and, different styles of lighting. It is a good feeling that people know when it's my lighting, like, oh, I knew by the lighting, or I knew by the angle that it was, that was you. And that's awesome. But sometimes I kind of want to do something different and surprise you. So, all of that, we get known for our styles and our work, but I like to be versatile, and because sometimes people are going to want something, different. And I try to pride myself on that.
Well, and that sums up our conversation beautifully. You definitely brought something different, and it's beautiful work. And again, we'll put those images in the show notes, bokehpodcast.com. For everybody listening in, you can go see those images, look at them, kind of follow along in the conversation as you're able to use those images as reference. And Drae, I just really appreciate you, first of all, just being willing to have a conversation, and then ultimately sharing your experience and your perspective and your wisdom on this topic. Will you just remind our listeners not only where they can find you on social media again, but also mention your website as well so that they can see your work?
Yes. Instagram is, most of my creative work. It is Brown615_photography. And my website is www.drae.brown.com.
Perfect. And we're going to put those both of those in the show notes at bokehpodcast.com. For everybody listening in, make sure you take advantage of the show notes. They are quite a wealth of information. We've got so many episodes worth of show notes, the talking points and the resources that we mentioned. So make sure you take advantage, particularly today with these beautiful images. Thanks once again, Drae, for making time for all of us.
I appreciate it. This was definitely a great experience.
Thanks so much, photographers, for listening to the Bokeh Podcast. Will you let us know what you thought of the show by leaving a review of the podcast in the Apple Podcast app? And I'd love to hear from you personally with your thoughts about the podcast and suggestions about future topics and guests for the show. My email is nathan@bokehpodcast.com. Make sure to visit our sponsors, photographersedit.com, custom photo editing for the professional photographer, and miilu.com, that's miilu.com, the simplest way to create and manage timelines and shot lists for the events you're photographing.